Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Stuart Onstad. My title at Onvia is the Director of Customer Success. And so what I've been doing over the last 11 years at Onvia is basically helping folks like you be successful with doing business with the government. I know it's not the most exciting, so that's why I'm here, to get you guys excited about doing business with the government. So I figured I'd put something on here, pretty exciting. Quick little something to kind of cleanse the palate a little bit. Word association game, okay? I'm going to look at some eyes and then maybe point at some people. So I say the word government. What's the first thing that pops in your head? Sir, what's the first thing that pops in your head?
I need a GSA contract.
You need a GSA contract? What's the first thing that pops in your head when I say government? Confusing. Nice. Enoch, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Complex. Leo?
A lot of work.
A lot of work? Okay, good. Okay, good. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm here. The government is this big complex thing. I'm going to really try to give you folks in a very short amount of time a couple of tips and things to do that can make sense of this market. I'm focusing on the state and local market in my presentation only because there's a lot of fracturing. All of the agencies in the state and local do things differently. The feds tend to work, at least similarly, although no less frustrating, I understand. But that's really the focus of this. So what I was going to cover today was just get a little bit of an idea of defining the market for you. Again, I'm going to go real fast here. It's not going to be a boring government conversation, at least I hope not. Talk a little bit about how they buy. And then really the key takeaway for you folks would be just to give you a framework that most of our clients, most of the people that I work with, they don't have a lot of time to spend thinking about state and local governments. It's a very important market, but it's one that's really fractured, so you don't really have a lot of time and a lot of bandwidth to think about it. So I wanted to give people just a couple little quick things to do that, and obviously we'll have some time for Q&A. I know there's a lot of folks. I've talked to quite a few of you in the networking session just a few minutes ago. There's a lot of you that are new. If you're new to the market, it's really knowing who it is that you want to identify, what's your target, specific entities, and the people. It's really about those things, the entities and the people. We'll get to that in a moment. So you guys that are new, you just need to figure out where to start and then basically develop a strategy. For those of you that are already in the market, whether you're entrenched or think you are or your partners are, you probably want to spend some time thinking about how to strategize. But also, I hear this all the time from folks, is they're stuck with an agency. There's an agency that I'd really like to penetrate, I'd really like to target, and I'm having trouble. I'm not going to address every single one because they're all so different, but at least some of these things might give you some ideas on maybe where to get unstuck. Okay? So the first thing I want to do is, when we say the word government, we think complex, we think bureaucracy, we think many, many things. I think one of the things that might help in just kind of the definition is to stop thinking of government in terms of bureaucracy and start thinking of them as the economy, as part of the economy. And once you think of that, then it's like, oh, that's good because they buy things and they buy lots of things. Last year, it was basically $5.6 trillion, almost half of every single dollar spent in the United States was spent by the government. So like it or not, but if they're spending money to buy your guys' stuff, that's a good thing. But again, thinking of it in terms of the economy. So what are some of the examples? What are some of the things that the governments do that they need to purchase and things that they need to purchase? And I'll show you what that means here in a second. I've got a kind of illustrative slide on all of them. But then once you figure out what it is that your market is, and that's really what this first part is, then you need to figure out, okay, who is the agency that oversees that? So what we then think about is, an agency itself, well, it's kind of nebulous, but really the definition is any entity that receives dollars from taxpayers. So if you've got a taxpayer-funded project, then that is likely to be government. And again, I know that sounds really, really simple, but if you're trying to think about separating the two markets and differentiating your sales efforts and marketing efforts, it can be really helpful to say, all right, which piece of this is going to be taxpayer-funded and which isn't? As a result of the taxpayer dollars being used for these purchases, the good news and the bad news and I'll talk about that in a minute too, is that these projects are sometimes visible to you and, well, the unfortunate part is to everybody else too. So that's one of the things about the agency. By the way, one of the stories that I've always said is, when we our company helps people do business with government agencies, and then I'll introduce myself at various meetings like this, and they'll say, oh, that's too bad, you can't help me. And I'll say, why not? They say, well, we do business with schools. And I go, oh, so schools are taxpayer funded. They don't really call themselves agencies, but they're taxpayer funded. So, again, another way of thinking about an agency. Schools, especially, I always use the example in Texas. Anybody from Texas in here? Go to school in Texas. You went to school at an ISD, or an independent school district, right? Independent school district, very Texas thing to do anyway, but it's independent. It's not part of the city or the state. Now, they get money from those folks, so they're not necessarily an agency like the city or the state, but they are a taxpayer-funded entity nonetheless. So again, another way to just think about the market. And then finally, probably the most important thing about this is who does the buying at the agency. So you have an agency, you've got a state agency, you've got a city, a county, a school district. There's many, many, many departments within that. Which part of that actually does the buying? And identifying the buyer in that particular agency is really the key to doing business with the government. And so what I did here was took a little Tennessee spin on since we're in Tennessee, that would be appropriate. Do a little Tennessee spin on this. So, what's your market? So the first part is, what is it that the government does that you folks are a part of or can be a part of? And I just kind of wrote down the list here. I didn't put healthcare on here. I'm ashamed. I also didn't put public safety, and there's a lot of applications in here. There's a few applications for you guys in here as well. But anyway, these are basically what governments do. Okay, they provide all these things. There might be private enterprises with schools and some of these, but most of this stuff is strictly government. So, all right, we've got an idea of what they do. Who do we call? Who is it that we need to contact or do business with? So we have the government agency. The agency is kind of the overarching, overseer of all these things. So for roads, state of Tennessee. For transit, it's the Nashville MTA. For libraries, it happens to be the government of Nashville and Davidson County. So knowing that is really important. The final column here is really, again, the piece that you need to know is the purchasing entity. So for example, the DOT, which buys more things than anybody from the state standpoint, and a lot of you folks probably do business with DOTs, works with the state. Obviously, that's not work with them. They're part of the state government. And then on down the list, the water services folks are part of the metropolitan government here. The maintenance, I know we've got a few folks that talk to me about maintenance tagging for the things that you guys do within school districts. If there's especially in schools that are far flung, they're going to need tagging and inventory control and things like that. So who is it that you would sell to with that particular agency? And on down the list. Okay? So who are your clients? Who are your customers? Who are your targets? Really, really, really important. And the good news is that it's structured. The bad news is that the structure is different for, all 79,000 agencies out there. So, I'm not here to tell you that it's all roses, that it's all easy. But what I'm here to do is if this framework, you can start using this framework to basically start to analyze that and just break it down a little bit. Okay. This is where we get into the real fun stuff. I'm kidding. So government agencies have centralized purchasing. That's what makes them different than the private sector, for good or for bad. They are basically the keepers of the rules. These folks are administrative in nature, but they also know everything about how to do business with that agency. And we encourage anybody who wants to do business with an agency, and when I'm saying agency, is specifically states and locals because they're independent. The feds, or you got to get on the CCR and do some things for all of them. For the states and locals, you're going to go to each individual agency and start. I encourage people to do this with the procurement office. Again, they don't make decisions on what to buy, but they tell you how the rules for that particular agency are done. They can give you tips on how to basically get started with them. And again, calling them won't always be fun. I've had people tell me all the time, it's like, have you ever called a government purchasing person? I'm like, well, yeah, I actually have a number of times, and it's not always the most pleasant thing, but you also, depending on the size of the agency, depending on how internet savvy an agency is, depending on how it's broken up, every purchasing department's pretty much similar in makeup. What we're finding now is that, how there's no money in government right now. They're basically, states and locals are running out of money like crazy. Well, they're pruning admin staff, and one of the things that they're doing is they're starting to prune purchasing entities. They're less centralized now. That's not overnight thing. It'll be something that happens over time, but it's something that you folks are going to need to keep in mind. And what it's going to take to deal with that is what I'm going to talk about here in the next slide. And that is to understand where in the agency your specific purchase is going to go, what it's going to be needed for, and that sort of thing, to understand the departments. Now, what's interesting about the departments here is that what I call them, is I call them decision makers. And what's interesting about this whole process is that, typically a decision maker or a decision would be made at the end of a process, right? I'm going to get all my facts in and make a decision, okay? With the government, the decisions are typically made early, okay? Because what happens is the government decides, the decision makers decide, or the departments decide what they need. And they're going to be those decisions are going to be based on your folks' interaction with them, your partner's interaction with them, other types of things, visiting these people in advance. Then they're going to make the decision to buy either what you folks sell or something like what you sell, so that your products or services are going to be needed. The more that you know in advance that your products or services are going to be needed, the more advantages you have later when that RFP or bid is issued. So the whole purpose of this is to understand that the decision-making process with the government is early. So the earlier you can get in with these folks, the better. The other thing that I like to point out is that these folks are also considered end users. And to me, what that means is the product is going to go to their department. So again, in the traditional private sector world, an end user, it's not somebody you're going to want to talk to. You're going to want to talk to a decision maker. Well, the decision maker is the end user. That's where the product's going to go. So if you think of these folks as the end users of your products and your services and all the things that you do, then those are the people you're going to want to get in front of. Okay? By the way, if you guys have any questions, I'm speaking really general. I appreciate the attention I'm getting. But if you have any questions, feel free to just interrupt during the session. Oh, forgot to even talk about the most important thing here. Relationships. Relationships in the government are more important than they are in the private sector. Why would I say that? Anybody want to chime in? Does anybody have an idea? Yeah, go ahead.
It sounds like you said the decisions are made up front. So if you have that relationship up front?
Yeah, that's usually how it goes. You have to, so a bid comes out, we'll talk about the formal projects in a moment, but if a bid comes out and you don't know who that agency is, it might be, you might read the spec and you might see your stuff in there, you might see something that you can do, but your chances necessarily of winning that, if it's a hard bid and it's just a straight product thing, but a lot of you folks in the room are VARs, and so you might not be able to compete on price, okay? So if you don't have a relationship with that agency, you might need to get in the fact, what is the value add for your company and what you folks do? You might need to get to talk to them first about that. That way the bid has that built in, so you're not just bidding price, because nobody wants to get into that thing. So yeah, that's exactly right. You want to get in early for that. What else? Where else are relationships more important for government? Anybody want to know? Or no? It's because people move around a lot, government. The money moves around all the time. It's a big shell game. The departments shift all the time. So again, understanding all the different players, all the different people, you can't just, and folks that are in the government know this, you can't just rely on one person to ram your message through. You have to get into a lot of different places. And you can't do it in the traditional ways you do in the private sector. You can't, take in ball games. You can't even give them a mug of candy these days. You have to actually visit them, take your line card with you, take your spec sheet with you, Have your differentiator in hand and talk to those folks. Okay? So relationships, absolutely huge. So decision makers and purchasers. There is the board and the commissioners, and I'll explain that in a minute. But again, just to think of your market, the agency now, who do we contact within the agency? Two groups of people. The decision makers are the end users are one group, and the actual procurement department is another. Okay? Again, understanding who is responsible for what. The good news is that this is the general framework. Again, the bad news is that they all go this way. I mean, it's just crazy how that works. So understanding that there's typically, especially for larger agencies, a place to start. And again, I would start here. And then eventually you want to get out to the folks that are deciding what to buy. Now, just to illustrate the purchasing process a little bit more, basically what happens is once these decision makers decide what to buy, then they go to the agency procurement office and say, hey, we need to put a bid out for this, or we need to put an RFP out for this particular project. The agency will conduct the process, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. Once they do the process, I'm skipping ahead a lot here. They will, let's say it's a bid, it's the easier one to get and explain. So it's going to be price typically. Whoever's the lowest price. The agency is going to do all that. Now, the procurement office does not make the decision even. Once they get the lowest bid, they can't award the project. Very important to know. They actually have to go out to the governing body of the agency to get approval. Now, typically it's a rubber stamp. So once the agency purchasing office gets it, agency rubber stamps it. But again, it's really important to understand that these folks here, while important, are not the decision makers. They don't make the final award. Somebody asked me, one of my salespeople at Onvia asked me, in the sales world, would these be gatekeepers? Would they be influencers? Would they be decision makers? Now, they're definitely not decision makers. I'd say they're a hybrid between an influencer and a gatekeeper. I think they're probably more knowledgeable than most gatekeepers in the private sector because they know everything about purchasing. I don't know how influential they are, especially for specific technical purchases like your folks. For things like sand and gravel and concrete and lumber, right? They probably are fine. But for stuff like you guys have, and the things that you guys make and distribute, again, you're probably better off here. One of the things, though, to think about is that some agencies have centralized IT. And while I'm not really bad-mouthing our friends in the procurement office, but a lot of times they don't have a lot of a pull. However, there are some agencies that IT, for example, is a separate component. But we do find it from a study we've done over the years, it's less than half of cities and counties have dedicated IT. Most of the ITs are around the department. So you'll have the library and the police department, health department, they'll have their own IT efforts. If you can find an agency that has an IT department, it's possible that there's a dedicated procurement staff for IT. If you can identify that person, all of a sudden it becomes a lot easier to do business with that agency. Now, again, that's going to be in the minority of agencies, but if you can identify somebody like that, asking around, doing your networking, your due diligence with regard to the agencies and understand that that person might do that, then all of a sudden you've got a nicer in. With somebody that, if you called and talked to a procurement person about specific specs for a barcode scanner, they're going to just, eyes going to roll back in the back of their head. But if somebody is an IT buyer, they probably have some sort of experience with purchasing what you folks sell. Okay, finally, the agency, the board authorizes the award, and what I didn't do, because I didn't want to have too many arrows here, is then the procurement department puts the contract in, it goes out to the end users. Okay, so again, just real basic, but again, if you can visualize each of the government agencies in this way, it becomes a lot easier to understand. I'm not going to do Riverdance. Just not. Nobody needs that. Nobody needs that. I don't have the tearaway clothing either, so. I know. No, you're lucky, trust me. Okay. Had to spice up this government thing some way or another, didn't I? All right, so now we understand. We understand the market. We understand who the entities are that are going to buy what you sell. Now we even have an understanding who the people are, okay? So just real basically, we understand at least how the whole thing works. Now we need to understand how they buy, okay? And this, to me, is the easiest way to understand how they buy. There is this concept called a threshold. And what's interesting is we've done a lot of work with government agencies. We have a lot of partners. Onvia has a lot of partners with government agencies themselves. And I ran this concept by them. They actually ran it by me a long time ago, said, hey, there's this threshold concept, and if a purchase is over this dollar threshold, it becomes a formal purchase. If it's underneath the threshold, it becomes an informal purchase. Well, after I learned that, I said, oh, let me go and look through government purchasing documents. I know. Well, you're lucky that I had to do it so you guys wouldn't have to. And find out where that term is and what it actually means. Well, guess what? They don't put it out. There's no term. There's this threshold thing governs just about everything that government purchasing does, but they don't even talk about it. I'm going to show you how it manifests itself on government purchasing sites in a few minutes. But yeah, so this concept is huge. So it's this tipping point where if a purchase is over a certain amount, then it becomes formal. If it is under it, it's informal. So real quickly, what is a formal? Well, we think of formal. Almost want to have you guys think of formal, like a formal dinner party, right? What is a formal dinner party? It has a lot of rules, right? I got to dress in certain things. I've got to bring certain things. My wife's going to be mad if I don't bring a bottle of wine, that kind of stuff, right? I have to do certain things. That's formal. Got a lot of rules, okay? Well, on the informal side of things, I'm going to bounce back here, I apologize. Informal, there's not many rules, okay? So an informal party, you can come as you are. Bring a bag of chips, okay? Maybe not. But you can, right? So the government works the same way. Formal, the rules. There are tons of rules, but here's the only one that really matters to you guys, okay? The formal project is advertised, okay? Now, some of you are probably saying, well, not always. No, not always. None of this stuff is black and white. But that's one of the main rules about a formal purchase, is that it is advertised somewhere. And it's not like advertised like a slick magazine ad or anything like that. It's in a newspaper and a classified ad. It's on their website. It's buried somewhere, okay? But it is advertised, okay? Well, on the flip side of that, the informal projects are not advertised. Why? Because the dollar amount is low enough that they don't necessarily care about it. So, for large road infrastructure projects, major hardware purchases and things like that, they care about it. For staplers and projectors, small things, individual barcode scanners, things like that can be purchased informally. For those of you that are familiar on the federal side, the federal threshold is $25,000, basically. So if it's over $25,000, it's got to go through Fed Biz Ops. If it's under $25,000, they can purchase it off the GSA schedule. On the local level, they don't have a GSA schedule. I don't know. Necessary. It wouldn't be nice at all if they had a GSA schedule. For those of you that are on it, no. But they do have informal vendor lists and things like that where they do purchases off of. And if you are on that vendor list, by the way, how do you get on a vendor list? Is you call purchasing. That's how you get on. So those folks in the middle of the previous diagram. So we have formal and informal. The advertise is the main rule you need to worry about. So what happens if something is advertised? Lots of people know about it. It's now competitive. Okay? So that's part of this whole process. People focus so much on bids and RFPs. We tell people, well, focus on bids and RFPs because that's where the money is. Okay? But here's the big deal. Only 20% of purchasing events happen through the formal channels. There's a huge, huge, huge amount of purchasing going on, basically invisibly. I mean, if you have a relationship with those agencies, then you at least know some of it. But a huge, huge component now this isn't exact, right? Both of these, I just decided to do an 80-20 rule here. So you say 20% of purchases account for 80% of the dollars. You got your huge $1 billion in Seattle where I'm from. We've got a tunnel that's going under to replace an aging viaduct. We've got a floating bridge, a couple of floating bridges we're replacing, these $1 billion projects. That's one or three. And then, the city buys, 10 different laptop purchases at $10,000 a piece. That's 10. Okay, so those are under the threshold. So again, the number of purchases over the threshold is low, but the dollar amount on those is high. The competitiveness on the formal is high. On the informal side, it's low. So what you folks need to do when you're coming up with strategies is realize when you're asking yourself, okay, if you are currently doing business with the government, how much is it where the phone rings and they're calling you? That's the informal stuff, by the way. Okay? And how much is it that you have to go out and be competitive on? And sometimes it's a have to, right? So I talked to a lot of people. I was like, yeah, I really don't want to go out to bid with this, but I want to do business with that agency. I want to show them my intent. I don't want to win this one. Or I can't win this one, but I have to go to all this effort. Well, because the dollar amount on the other side is really worth it. So anyway, that's kind of the way to look at it. So we ask clients all the time, what is your average order size? What is, what sort of, how do people buy? How do agencies specifically buy your product? I know that in your guys' situations, you've got, massive systems and things you can buy, or people can buy things, piecemeal. So again, thinking about how you want to go to market. Most of our clients, when we ask them, do you do business informally or formally, or competitive or not competitively, they'll say yes. So how much? Okay, and most of our clients, when I ask them that question, go, I don't really know. Okay, so it's probably not a bad idea to figure out, if you can, what percentage of your business is the big game and what percentage is the smaller stuff. There's advantages and disadvantages to both. Okay, I'm not saying there's one better way, but for your individual companies and your strategies and your initiatives, pick the one that's right for you. Okay? Any questions about this stuff already? Okay? All right, and we're actually at a spot here where I can show you what I mean. Now, kind of incorporating all the things that I've talked about. Again, we're not going to spend time going through all the different links in these sites. Okay, I've pre-screened these for you folks, and that's important because nobody wants to go through these. By the way, if you ever have tried to find a purchasing website for a government agency, it's very, very difficult most of the time. Some of the times they just have a nice little thing, doing business with the government, and it has it on there. Some of the agencies are really, it's great. Most of them are really hard, and some are, they don't even have a purchasing link on there. So let's see if I can, this will actually go out here. Hey, how about that? So our friends at the Orlando International Airport. So again, this is just, for one, if you want to do business with an agency, so those of you that are new, this is the kind of stuff that you're going to need to do. For those of you that already do business with these folks, this is the kind of additional information that can probably help you understand maybe why things are taking so long. First of all, you notice the massive amount of information for an agency like this. Look at all the different links they have. We've got registration. You can see that I've been to a lot of these already. The purchasing events. We've even got a list of purchasing staff, which is cool, right? Because now we've identified that some of these, for some of you folks, the purchasing staff may be a great place to start. And actually, these people might even be folks that you want to have a relationship with. I've got a list here, potentially. I can market to them. Okay? So that's something to think about. But also, if you are trying to go to the purchasing division, might be helpful to understand what these folks are, responsible for. Is this a totally centralized location? Well, these folks are only in charge of operation and maintenance. Some of you said operation and maintenance, kind of a place you play in. That's cool. So this place would be great here. But they don't do construction requirements or concession agreements or property leasing. So if you were trying to go to the purchasing department for those things, they're going to go, that's not our problem. That's not our problem. I mean, not that a government agency would say that. I'm kidding. Anyway, so the other thing that you just look real quick down here is like contracts, solicit and word for good. And there's our number. We don't even need to read it. Go straight here. What do we have? We have a purchasing threshold. Hey, look at that, $100,000. Now, most aviation authorities and port authorities, they're a little higher. The ports and aviation authority, that's another market I didn't address on here, but that's another market, airports, things like that. Great people to work with a lot of times because their entities act more like the private sector folks that you're probably more comfortable with. And because, you know why? Because they actually like to make money. Port authorities do. They'll take, they take $4 or $5 every single time we take off and land in an airport. They sell and buy property. They're really good at that, okay? And they try to make money. So, you might go, that might be a good place to do. So, and their purchasing thresholds are higher as a result. Most agencies are lower, okay? So once you figure it out, oh, that's higher. Well, that means I could do a lot of business, 100 grand. I could do a lot of business with this agency by doing what they call a request for quote, okay? So again, back to our original concept, formal, informal, less rules. A request for quote, they call you up, or they maybe put a fax out and says, hey, I need a quote for this equipment. And you just give them a quote, and you're done, okay? Now, again, you want to have a good relationship so you know that you're not getting price gouged all the time and shopping and all those kinds of things that you know you have to deal with. But at least you understand that is how this particular agency works. And if you can sell them stuff for less than $100,000, then it doesn't have to go out to the competitive process. So just real general stuff, okay? So this is one of the agencies. Now another one, near and dear to my heart because it's my hometown. And again, lots of stuff. Lots of government, very liberal in Seattle. So lots of government, a lot of things going on, and even more departments and stuff. Making things happen is just crazy. But you look here, and right off the bat, we see our threshold again, $44,000. Okay, so and this one even gives you a little bit of direction. These are actually good examples of purchasing sites that can give you some guidance on what to do and how to manage your processes here. So all purchases for any department above 44K, centrally managed. Construction contracts are basically managed through each department. So in this particular case, you've got goods and services, products, materials underneath that, managed by the city, the purchasing department, but the departments themselves, manage the other stuff. Okay, so we scroll down a little bit here. I'll try to cut to the chase here. Formal sealed process, as we said, formal sealed process. Proposal process is conducted for acquisitions above 44K. Purchases less than are not formally advertised, and they even call them informal purchases, are decentralized. But this is giving you guidance here. Back to our original drawing. This says they're decentralized. So the agency might purchase them from the purchasing department, but for a smaller purchase, they're saying you can go directly to the department. So all of a sudden, you've got your purchasing group, but you also have your decision makers that can also buy the small stuff too. So again, that's just for this agency though. That's the good news. It's just now you understand how the city of Seattle works. So for those of you who want to do business with these guys, you're set. Now, one of the things that I found interesting is in doing a lot of working here, and I'm going to have to figure this out again because they moved it on me. Oh, yeah, they do this all the time. I've trained reps, and I use the same sites, okay? And I use the same sites a lot of times because I'm familiar with it. And I go to the link, and what I'm looking for isn't there anymore. Anybody ever had that happen before? It happens with us. One of the things that Onvia does also is we go out and aggregate all this content. City of Seattle says they publish from their website and the Daily Journal of Commerce. Well, there's a Park and Recs bid that one of our clients said, hey, you guys missed it because it was published, it was posted on the Park and Rec site that never has any bids, ever. And so there it was. And so we had to go find it. But anyway, those kinds of things happen. So, registration, that's what I'm going for right here. Let's see if I got this right here. Oh, yes, this is the one. So this is fun. We figured we had our purchasing threshold for the agency. Hey, we got CD Seattle figured out, $44,000, right? Well, if you're a consultant, no, it's a different one. Check this out. So they actually have a roster here that if your service is $260,000 or less, you can get on this roster, and that won't be published. That'll be informal too. Okay? So you've got one agency with two different bid thresholds. Right? This is what you folks are dealing with, and I'm not trying to scare you, but I'm also trying to make you aware of the landscape out there, and that this is not atypical. This happens all the time. We do find that for consultant stuff, because of the process is a little different, right? A hard bid is a dollar amount at the end, and I was going to spend time on bids and RFPs. You guys got that. But it's easier. The proposal process, because that process is so laborious for agencies. So again, a lot of you folks might be involved in RFPs where there's actually a proposal, a qualification, an approach. some other kinds of things. So it's more than just the price of the equipment. Then what they do is then they're having to figure out who wins by committee. So anyway, it takes a little bit longer. So they tend to raise the threshold there. So if it's an RFP, the threshold might be long. If you find yourself partnering up with other companies going after RFPs, and you're wondering why you don't see them through the ScanSource government stuff or any of the other things that you have available out there, that's one of the reasons. We tell people that all the time. In fact, Onvia, we're collecting bids and RFPs a lot because that's what's mostly visible. Of bids and RFPs together, bids account for 87% of the formal announcements. RFPs only account for 13%. So if you're wondering why you never see those RFPs very often for specs and the design and consulting side of things, that's why. And one of the reasons is the threshold can be a little higher. Okay? All right. How are we doing on time here? Hey, almost done. A couple of things that I wanted to do for you folks here is just real briefly, just give you some things that are going. I mentioned that procurement offices are shrinking. There's this notion of piggyback contracts. Basically what that is if an agency, if any government agency goes out to bid for something, another agency, depending on the laws for that particular one, can use that RFP, and whoever won that job can also be awarded the job for the other agency. As long as it was put out by some agency, then they call that piggybacking. And again, if procurement offices are shrinking, then they're going to want to do that. So more and more we're starting to see that. Larger projects, infrastructure projects, we're seeing a lot more public-private involvement because money's running out. So a kind of very new thing going on there, especially for things that were typically just left to the government, wastewater treatment plants, road projects, bridges, things like that. You now see private companies getting involved in that. That might have to do with things like maybe hospitals and stuff like that you folks might be involved in at some point in time. Purchasing cooperatives. I know probably a lot of you folks who's WSCA? Does anybody know about WSCA, Western States Contracting Alliance? Yeah, you know about WSCA? There's purchasing cooperatives all over the country. That's when a whole bunch of agencies get together and use their purchasing power to get better prices for the equipment that you sell. Okay? And we're seeing more and more of that. And then privatization, we're starting to see operation and maintenance things being privatized. So government agencies might have a parking garage or something like that where they would manage it. Now they're actually letting a private company do all the management. The city of Seattle is kind of like that. They've got 7 or 8 different parking structures. Pity them because they don't know how to run a business and they're not doing so well. But that's kind of the trend. So they're turning these things over to private companies to run this kind of stuff. Resources. So want to make sure that everybody in this room signs up for the government source program. Again, Onvia helps ScanSource with the information on there, but they do a great job with the marketing information. Again, as you can see, it's more than just the notices for bids and RFPs. There's a lot of other stuff involved here, and they can help you with that kind of stuff. Networking sites, LinkedIn is there's a few government stuff, mostly federally focused. There's really that's one of the reasons why I spoke on this topic today. There's really a dearth of information on the state and locals because they do so many different things. And then the newsfeed sites, these are great ones here. You guys are probably familiar with most of them, but again, there's a ton of them. I've been reading a lot of them lately and just kind of helps me understand what the trends are, what things are going on. And if you start to receive, it's nice to just get notices from these folks to have them send you those pieces of information. Some of them are technology based, which is great. Others are government stuff. I was talking to a few of you at the beginning of the session here. You folks all have your technical specs and the things that you do. But I think one of the things that I heard around the room that was pretty loud and clear was that you guys were also very familiar, and this is very smart, very aware of the problem that you were solving from a human standpoint. So what is it that you're actually doing? What's the problem that you're solving? And then the technical specs, the things that you do, your products do, will solve those problems. It's really important to understand what problems the agencies have. So some of these, like CivSource, is a great example of some of the problems that those folks are running into. Okay? And I think that's all I got. Yeah, there's some questions, kind of seed questions that I kind of mentioned here before. how much formal stuff do you do? How many agencies call you? So again, just kind of trying to think about that. Some of you manage a lot of people. Your people, are they doing business? Are they going out? Is business coming in? How many government agencies are you registered with? So if you manage a territory or a group of people, how many vendor lists are they on? How many agencies have they gone to those sites that we looked at? And you're probably going, I don't want my people going to those sites. They'll take all their time. But again, you do need to register with those government agencies in order to do business with them. Okay? By the time you register, then great. But for some agencies, a bid could come out, and if it's an agency you've never done business with, the registration process takes longer than the bid is open. So the bid's only open for a couple weeks, 3 weeks. Registration process takes like a month. Well, okay, I got to get involved earlier. So again, that's that early piece, the relationship piece. Win ratio. What is your win ratio on competitive projects? Okay. So start to think about that. If your win ratio is really high in competitive projects, then good. You're doing great. If it's really low, then something's wrong, and you probably need to spend some time building some relationships. Okay? Maybe working with another partner that has a relationship, doing the informal process. And I know you folks all know this, but again, this is the biggest thing right here, this last one, second to the last one. What is your differentiator? What is it that you do differently than your competitors? Government, agencies, that's all they care about. In the private sector, you can deal with other stuff, but in the government, it's got to be something that's different. And it's just super, super important. I know most of you already know about this. And then finally, what does your best customer look like? I had one of you folks said, well, we've been lucky with some government. You know what? That's how a lot of it works. But guess what? You might be lucky, but if you start doing things to the customers that are alike, in other words, this agency looks like this, looks like that, then you're going to start getting in front of people. And yeah, it might look lucky, but it isn't. Okay? It's because you have had some processes around you. You've been really cognizant of the types of agencies that you want to go after. Okay? So that'll do it for me. Any specific questions? I've been working with clients at Onvia now for about 10 years, all sizes, shapes, a lot of IT folks, a lot of implementers, a lot of distributors, manufacturers, designers, the ops and maintenance people. Any questions that I can answer for you folks? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't do anything with the government.
Lucky you.
After seeing this, I don't. This is great, a great eye-opener. But a question I have, when I hear about going out to bid and RFPs and RFQs and all of that stuff, I always think of it's always naturally going to go to the lowest bidder.
Right.
Is that the case,
well,
or are there other differentiators?
Sure. It depends. So if an agency knows exactly what they want, then it tends to be a bid. For most technical stuff, so you folks in the room can maybe add to this, but from where I've sat for the years, IT is going to be a combination of telling the agency what they need, implementing it, and the equipment. And so if it's all of the above, then the equipment might cost a certain amount, but the implementation and the design are things where there's expertise, there's experience, there's certifications, there are maybe it's delivery time, maybe it's other word of mouth, other agencies that they've done business with, and they take all of those things into consideration before deciding who wins. Now again, they don't like to do that because it just takes a lot more time. And what these folks in the room try to do is to get to a point where it's not price bid. They want to get to a point where it is about their specific product, their specific value add that can get them the purchase, or to get their value add or their product specified in the bid or RFP so that there's fewer, or in the best of the cases, right, it's just you. I know, hardly ever happens, but when it does, it's awesome. Anyway, that's the idea. So the work is done earlier. The more work you do earlier, the less likely it is that it goes out to a bid and that you can get more of a proposal type of thing. Yeah, Leo.
Can you comment on the threshold and the 8A companies and minority companies?
Sure.
That relate to each
Sure.
other?
So do you have a specific question like what?
Well, I mean, like you said, if you don't want to go, or they don't want to go on the formal bid, right? If you're an 8A, then
right.
blessing.
So if you're 8A, right? Okay, I see where you're going with this. So if you're 8A, you're a little bit you're smaller. So it's there's actually three. I put the minority and disadvantaged groups into three different types of minority disadvantage. There's the economic, and that's the small business. That's 8A, and that's an SBA, Small Business Association thing for the federal side. So the smaller businesses would absolutely benefit by getting under the threshold, having relationships with those agencies, because the formal projects are probably going to go to the larger groups. Now, on the federal side, if there is an 8A requirement or there's another program there called Total Small Business, then the prime, okay, is going to have a certain percentage of small 8A contractors, so they need you. So if you are a small business and you are 8A, the larger people need you, because their proposals, their bids can be enhanced by having the smaller companies, for you folks as subcontractors. And then the threshold piece is absolutely, you want to think about where that threshold is. That's why it's good to find that out if you can. It's a moving target for some agencies. That's how it goes. Any other questions? Excellent. Thank you, folks, for your attention today. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.